the founder editor of Netha Data. And Netha Data is an independent and non-partisan service, a news service that is focusing on Indian politics and policy. And I think of Netha Data as addressing one of three problems. Right now, we're focusing on what politicians do, because a lot of the media is focusing always on what politicians say. And the subject of today's conversation is a thought box, and this addresses a second problem that Netha Data is trying to solve, which is that there aren't enough safe spaces for Indians in the public sphere for having safe conversations about some of the most contentious issues. And the third problem that we're addressing with Netha Data is the media itself. It has a crisis of credibility, and there's an absence of transparency. So what's a thought box for the thinking Indian? It's like a box of tools, a toolbox. And similarly, a thought box is a box of thoughts or some principles that I believe that we need to address some of the most contentious issues in our politics. I'll get to that in a moment, but first I'm going to tell you a small story. As it happens, this is a story of my own impulsiveness, and it's a story of my own impulsiveness on social media. On 29th of September, I wrote a Facebook post, and this is what I wrote. I said, "Well done, India." This reminds me that I too need a surgical strike against the torn cartilage in my left knee, which has been carrying out proxy warfare in my body for the last 10 years. I repeat, it's kind of a longish status update. I said, "Well done, India. This reminds me that I too need a surgical strike against the torn cartilage in my left knee that has been conducting proxy warfare on my body for the last 10 years. Now, when I wrote this update, people didn't really know how to react. I have many friends on Facebook. Some of them put likes or placed likes, clicked on the like button. Some people commented. A few friends of mine were very angry. One friend in particular was very, very angry, and she thought I was making fun of the Indian Armed Forces. And another friend of mine thought that I was being sarcastic, and that I was actually standing up for all the talk of warmongering that we'd been hearing in that month. And just to refresh our memories, a few days earlier, the Indian Army had announced that they'd carried out a surgical strike across the line of control in retaliation for the deaths of 18 Indian Army personnel a few days earlier. So these were very fevered times, and I wrote that Facebook post, and the truth is, I was neither trying to make fun of anybody. I was very proud of the Indian Army, and I still am, and I was also not trying to be sarcastic. It just simply occurred to me that having myself suffered from a knee condition for about 10 years, and an orthopedic surgeon 10 years ago had asked me to undergo surgery, and it was an option that I felt not comfortable in choosing, and therefore I thought, well, the knee is conducting proxy warfare on my body. Maybe it's funny, maybe I should put it up, maybe I should put it up on Facebook. People will think it's funny, and of course it was anything but. It ended up hurting a lot of people. Of course, the big question is, why am I bringing this up right now? The fact of the matter is, at any given point of time, there are a number of status updates on social media. There's a lot of chatter on Twitter. There's a lot of chatter on WhatsApp groups, outside or offline as well, in dinner party conversations, in conversations with friends. When we have conversations at work, there are heated conversations about the challenges of our times and a lot of the contentious issues that we face as a nation. And the truth of the matter is, we live in polarized times. And what I mean by this is, very simply, pretty much anything we say or do sometimes is ascribed to either one of two poles. If we say something, we're seen as either leftist, sometimes we're seen as rightist. Sometimes people call us secular, sometimes they say communal. If we say something against the government, we're called anti-national. If we say something for the government, we have a lot of chatter and people calling us, words like bhakts. So the fact of the matter is, this is not an atmosphere in which we can actually have a sustained and reasonable dialogue. And as a political journalist, it is that obsesses me a lot. The need to have reasonable dialogue. What are the conditions under which we can have reasonable dialogue? These are questions that I obsess over, and I believe that there is a way forward. And the way forward is to have an atmosphere of goodwill. The best way to have good dialogue is goodwill. But the thing is, because of a complex mix of historical, sociological and cultural and political factors, that kind of atmosphere of goodwill is simply not available, and it's not there for us, and therefore we have to discuss some of the most contentious issues using other tactics. And this is where I come to the idea of a thought box. A thought box, which I believe is a new language for our times and some new principles or guidelines when it comes to addressing some of the most contentious issues. At this point in time, you might be wondering, well, all this is very well. This is for journalists. This is for people like politicians, people who are in the public sphere. Why does it apply to me? After all, I'm a hardworking person. I go to school or I go to office. I come back. I carry out my other duties. I relax in the evening with loved ones or by myself. Why should I worry about all of this? And to that, my answer would be, well, we live in an age which is fueled by technology. Social media is not far off. We're just a click away from making our own opinions known to the entire world. In such a scenario, we all become public figures. And even if we are not the kind of people who like social media or who are online very much, we surely know people who are on social media and who are also just a click away from becoming public personalities. And yet another thought along these lines is, someday there might be a cause that you deeply care about that will need you to stand up and fight. For instance, people in the National Capital Region, they have to deal with air pollution, which is a big problem right now. It is perhaps something they did not think about 5 years ago. And what happens is people end up becoming activists. They ask government tough questions. People who didn't think of them as activists or political personalities end up taking political positions. And for such a scenario, we need a thought box, like I'm talking about. Well, so far I've told you my story about my status update. I've told you how it backfired. I've spoken about the need for reasonable dialogue. I've spoken about the need for a new thought box, a set of guiding principles. But before I get to that, there's one thing that remains to be said, which is a word on free speech. What is free speech? We all know this. It's basically a person's right to say whatever they think or feel, or publish whatever they think or feel without government sanction, without censorship, and without social or societal sanction. And there are very good reasons as to why we need free speech in our society. There are 4 reasons that I can think of right now. The first is progress. Without the frank and fearless exchange of ideas, we cannot contest existing ideas. Without contesting existing ideas, we cannot have progress. And I'll give you a few examples. Think about the theory that the earth moves around the sun or revolves around the sun. The theory of natural selection or Darwinian survival of the fittest. The theory of women being equal to men. The theory of all races being equal. The theory of all castes being equal. These are all theories which 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 50, 100, 500 years ago, if you had these theories and you published them or you spoke about them, it could put you in real danger. It could even give you a sentence for death. But somehow we as a society and we as a race, we've come across and we've fought through, and because of the ability of the expression and free speech, we've managed to contest old ideas and we've had progress. A couple of other reasons why we need free speech. One is, if you don't have free speech, you end up self-censoring and you end up thought censoring. What I mean by this is, if for instance you're on social media and you say something and somebody doesn't like what you said and about 100 people start abusing you and you go offline and then you start getting threats, the whole deal is you end up not expressing yourself in the future, and sometimes you end up not thinking about the ideas that made you want to express them either, and that is thought censorship. And just one more reason for why we need free speech: it's the best defense against poor government. If you don't like what the government is doing, whether it's the local government, the state government, the central government, you have the right to question the government's decisions. And so these are reasons why we need free speech, and because we have free speech more or less in our country, I now come to what I wanted to discuss. The 6 principles or the thought box that we need to focus to address some of the biggest challenges. First, I would say we must accept and learn that everybody has a valid point of view. and that we should take everybody seriously. A quick example, the American elections, the Democratic Party, had they listened to the supporters of Donald Trump, and had they not dismissed them as racists or misogynists, they might have won. The second, we have to accept that we have our own biases, and even the most unbiased of us is judgmental. A quick example again, I'm a journalist, I'm interviewing someone, I've been given 20 minutes, suddenly I'm told I just have 5 minutes, I have 20 questions, I have to cut that out, I've just got time to ask 5 questions. Which questions do I include? Which questions do I leave out? That is an editorial choice, and even if I'm non-judgmental, I'm bringing my own biases into this. And number 3, we must resist the urge to label others through language and through labels and jargon that makes us blind. For instance, calling somebody conservative, calling somebody a fascist, calling somebody, there are other more rude names. What happens is when you do that, there isn't enough space for sufficient dialogue. The fourth set of guidelines in this thought box, I would say, is we must all remember that having an opinion all the time about everything is not always desirable. An opinion is a thought stopped. That's what a professor of mine once told me. And I've realized it's true. When we have an opinion about something, it also means we've stopped engaging about that particular idea. And finally, last couple of thoughts in this thought box. It's perfectly fine to attack ideas, but we must always remember that we must not attack the person holding those ideas. And this is an important distinction that we must all learn to make. And the most important of all, the sixth guideline would be simply assume goodwill. What this means is you think the best of anybody when you come into a conversation, and what happens is you start appealing to the best in that person. And when you start doing that, you don't appeal to the worst in that person, and you can actually have a good conversation. So here's to having many important and good conversations about the most pressing issues of our times. Conversations with our friends, our family, conversations in school, in office, in public life, in speeches, in mohalla sabhas, so on and so forth. Thanks very much.